I never imagined that life would pull me back to Willow Creek, the quiet little town I once tried so hard to escape, and certainly not for the funeral of my former mother-in-law. It had been 4 years since my marriage to Nora Hayes collapsed silently under the weight of unspoken disappointments, signed papers, and two exhausted hearts. 5 years of marriage, 3 years of love before that, years I once believed were unbreakable. I used to think love could survive anything until life taught me that storms don't create cracks, they simply reveal the ones we never noticed. At 34, I returned here alone, divorced and still haunted by the memory of a woman I once vowed to protect. The memorial hall smelled of white flowers and damp cloth, a heavy mixture that clung to the air. Soft whispers drifted around the room like faint smoke. I recognized faces. Nora's relatives, old neighbors, people who used to join us for Thanksgiving dinners when I was still part of the family. I swallowed hard. I no longer belonged here. Still, despite everything that had happened between Nora and me, I respected her mother, Lydia Hayes. She had always been kind to me, even when I failed as a husband, even when our marriage was crumbling. I stepped toward the altar, placed a white rose, and bowed my head for a moment. The weight of the years pressed down on my shoulders, and as I turned, I saw her. Nora. She stood near the wall, surrounded by relatives, her face pale and her eyes swollen from crying. She looked thinner, more fragile, like someone who had carried more than her share of grief. My chest tightened sharply. She noticed me. Her expression flickered, surprise, hesitation, then a guarded calm. She nodded slightly. I nodded back. No words, not yet. I stepped away, intending to leave so I wouldn't worsen her already painful day, when suddenly a small body crashed into my leg. Careful there, I said automatically, bending down to steady the child. He couldn't have been older than 3. Large brown eyes, soft scattered waves of hair across his forehead. He frowned lightly, rubbing his head before lifting his gaze to mine. And my blood froze. His eyes, his nose, the shape of his jaw. He looked exactly like me, a mirror of my childhood. I couldn't move. The boy blinked at me curiously before a relative hurried over and scooped him up. Liam, sweetheart, don't run like that. I'm so sorry. I didn't answer. I couldn't. Liam. His name was Liam. I looked up at Nora. She stood still, clutching a tissue, her hands trembling. Her eyes flicked between me and the child before she turned away abruptly. My heartbeat pounded painfully. No, it couldn't be, but the resemblance was undeniable. I waited until the service ended and everyone had begun to leave. Nora stayed with her father, Robert Hayes, who looked as though he had aged 10 years since I last saw him. When I approached, he raised his head, surprise softening his tired features. Eli, I didn't expect you to come. I respected Lydia, I said quietly. He nodded and stepped aside, leaving Nora and me face to face for the first time in years. She didn't look at me. How are you, Nora? I asked, my voice low and cautious. I'm fine, she replied softly, brushing tears from her cheeks. Today isn't about me. I know, but I needed to ask. Her shoulders tensed immediately. That boy, Liam, is he... Don't, she whispered quickly, fear lacing her voice. Nora, he looks exactly like me. You know that. Eli, please, not here. I exhaled shakily, trying to steady myself. I deserve the truth. Silence stretched between us until she finally whispered, barely audible, Yes, he's yours. Everything around me vanished. The voices, the movement, the air itself. The world narrowed to a single truth I wasn't prepared for. My son. She closed her eyes, bracing herself, then spoke again, her voice trembling but firm. I found out I was pregnant months after the divorce. I left, I changed my number. I didn't want you to know. Her words struck like stone to my chest. I struggled to breathe. Why keep this from me? Why take my child from me? Tears filled her eyes and spilled silently down her cheeks. Because you didn't want me anymore, Eli. You were distant. You were already gone while we were still married. I couldn't bear to let my child depend on a man who had already chosen to walk away. That's not true. She cut me off with a quiet, devastating sentence. You betrayed me. The accusation cut deeper than a scream ever could. She didn't raise her voice, she didn't break, but the quietness of it, the calm, controlled truth, struck with merciless precision. You broke me, she whispered, staring at the floor as though afraid to meet my eyes. You broke everything. My trust, our marriage, my hopes, even myself. Words failed me. Every ounce of guilt, shame, and regret I had spent years hiding came crashing down. She wiped her tears quickly, angry at herself for letting me see her pain. I raised Liam alone, she said, fingers twisting together anxiously. I stayed awake night after night, terrified and exhausted, but I kept going. I didn't want you to feel obligated. I didn't want a father who loved out of guilt. And I wouldn't let my son grow up with someone who walked in and out of our lives whenever he felt lonely. Nora. I breathed her name like a prayer. I want to be part of his life. She shook her head slowly, her eyes glowing with sad defiance. You don't get to show up now just because the truth found you. He isn't your redemption, Eli. He's not a bandage for your regrets. I want my family back. I blurted, the words escaping before I could stop them. She froze, her body going still, as if the air around us solidified. We are not a family anymore, she whispered, her voice distant and cold from years of hurt. Her father watched us from a few steps away, grief etched deeply into his features. Grief not for her daughter's loss, but for the piece of her I had broken myself. Maybe, he began gently, you both should… No, Nora cut in sharply, not loud, but final. You lost that right, Eli, the day you chose another woman over your marriage. The day you decided there was no place for me, my pain, or our future. I lowered my head, shame burning through me. She turned to walk away, each step closing a chapter I never meant to end. Before disappearing into the hallway, she paused, just for a second, like a memory tugged at her, or a fear, or a wound reopening. Then she kept walking. In that moment, the world collapsed around me. Again. Maybe for the second time. Maybe for the 10th time. Maybe for the 1000th time, I paid the price for not realizing what I had until it was too late. But something inside me refused to fall this time. This wasn't just about a broken heart. This was about a child who carried my face, a child who ran into me with trust, not fear, a child who looked at me as if he knew me, even though I had never been there. This was about my son, and about the woman's name, despite everything, still wrapped itself around my heart. I lifted my head, inhaled slowly, and whispered a vow meant for no one but myself. I will not disappear. I will not repeat my mistakes. This time, I will fight. For Liam, for Nora, for the man I should have been years ago.